I want to flag, and that was perfect timing, that while we have historically not recorded the preview, we will be recording today's legislative preview as there are a handful of additional conflicts this morning, most notably DEQ's Air Board meeting this morning. So for those who are attending the Air Board meeting, we do want to make sure they're able to get the update on what has happened. So just wanted to let folks know that we are recording this morning's session for that reason. Today, you'll hear from leading environmental advocates about priority conservation issues we expect during the General Assembly this year. We're going to do this by issue panel, so there will be 2 to 3 speakers per panel, and then we'll open it up for questions. So if you do have a question for any of the panelists, you can type it directly to me. So my name on there is going to pop up as one of the co-hosts, and I will ask the questions at the end of the 2 to 3 person panel. After the issue panel, we'll have a short political lay of the land briefing. As you all likely already know, the political dynamics have shifted after the November election. And starting in January, we'll have a new Governor-elect Glenn Youngkin, and the Republican Party will take back control of the House of Delegates. And while many of our issues remain bipartisan and VCN and many of our partners are nonpartisan organizations, it is important for us to understand this political shift and what it means for what we can expect to accomplish in the upcoming year. The second portion of the program will break out by state Senate district for you to coordinate with other conservationists in your area and discuss ways that you can communicate your priority issues with legislators ahead of session. For that reason, you'll notice that we're asking you to change your display name to include your state Senate district at the front so that we can put you into breakout groups for that second portion of the program. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Before we do, I just want to very quickly do a big thank you to the VCN staff who has made this event possible. I am lucky to be able to welcome you all here, but of course they did the work to make this happen. So a huge thank you to Lisa, Nicole, and Andrew in particular, our entire program team for helping to line up the speakers. And I also just want to give a thank you to all of the speakers who will be joining us today, as well as the many advocates from around Virginia who are making all of these issues possible, who are not able to join us today or are not being the featured speakers. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. I'm excited to kick off our first panel on transportation and resilient communities. We have 3 speakers, Kim Germain of the Chesapeake Climate Action Network, Trip Pollard from the Southern Environmental Law Center, and Skip Stiles of Wetlands Watch. Kim, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Mary. Hi, everyone. My name is Kim Germain, and I'm the Virginia Director for the Chesapeake Climate Action Network and the Associated Action Fund. I'm really excited to be going first when your expectations are probably the lowest, so that's good for me. As many of you know, earlier this year, Virginia took some vital steps in the process to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles here in the Commonwealth and decarbonize our transportation sector. We became the first in the Southeast to adopt clean car standards and took legislative action to set a path forward for the expansion of charging infrastructure. But as is always the case, we have a ton of work left to do. During VCN's Common Agenda process this summer, partners came together to map out a few electrification policy objectives to pursue during the 2020 session, and a number of those were successfully pre-filed this past Monday. Firstly, a number of groups have been working diligently to ensure that funds are included in the governor's outgoing budget to electrify Virginia's school buses and provide financial incentives for electric vehicle adoption. These are all parts of legislation that were passed earlier this year in the 2021 session, and we want to make sure that funding for those programs come through. Groups have also been working to ensure that the Commonwealth works to increase access to charging infrastructure, and so that folks can also find and access existing charging easily. VCN partners will pursue legislation to improve visibility of and streamline electric vehicle charging signage, especially along highways. A bill has also been pre-filed to improve access to charging by protecting stations from being blocked by internal combustion engine vehicles. Lastly, partners plan to pursue legislation to save taxpayer dollars, reduce vehicle pollution, and modernize the state fleets by calling on decision makers to consider the comprehensive total lifetime cost of vehicle ownership or lease rather than only the upfront capital costs. And we are hoping that this sets a path forward for Virginia to start adopting newer vehicle technology as the first choice for state fleets. And so those are just a few of the electrification pieces of legislation that we'll be pursuing this upcoming session. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. I'm going to pass it on to Trip. Just a reminder, if you do have questions for any of the speakers, you can chat those into the box directly to me, and these three speakers will be available for questions following this first panel. Trip.
Thanks, Mary. I'm Trip Hullard. I'm the head of the Land and Community Program for Southern Environmental Law Center. And I'll just touch base on some various items in kind of the overall basket of transportation reform. So looking ahead to next session, we're probably going to have to focus much more on defending recent progress in reforming transportation, although there are likely to be some opportunities for further progress coming up. With the change in the House, as Mary mentioned, and the governor-elect who didn't provide many details on transportation, among just about every other topic, it's more difficult than usual to kind of predict where this section is going to go. But there's been strong bipartisan support for some of the areas where we've made progress in recent years in Virginia. And, I think that's something that we can draw upon both to defend our recent gains and to build upon some other areas of progress, hopefully. As you just heard, Clean Cars Bill was one of our big successes this year. We also think it may be a target. So we are going to be prepared to defend that. Another area where I think a particular concern is to defend the recent progress we've made in funding. In the 2020 Transportation Omnibus Bill, there's record funding for transit and rail. And we need to make sure there's no attempt to raid that funding for other purposes. I'm a bit less concerned now than I was a little while ago, given the infrastructure bill, because Virginia's going to get a whole lot more money for roads, rail, and transit as a result of what the Congress has done. I think that might take some of the pressure off, or some of the temptation to try to take some of that money and redirect it from the cleaner transportation modes. But then there is one of the few things the governor-elect did mention was his desire to freeze the gas tax.
The guy with the heaters is on his way.
Okay. And so, I think that there's definitely going to be a move for that. We'll see if they can make that work with the budget, with also his other proposals on grocery tax and other things, if they can make the numbers work. We are somewhat agnostic on that as long as they find a way, which he also promised, to not cut any transportation projects as a result of that. So a 1-year freeze in the gas tax, if there's other ways to make up and make sure we don't have any cut to transit, rail, or bike ped projects, is probably something we can live with if we have to. More likely and more troubling will be attempts possibly to fund specific destructive highway projects. We've seen this in previous years, and I think with the changes in the House, we're more likely to see some again. Some of the ones we've seen in recent years have been I-73, Coalfields Expressway, Bi-County Parkway, Nemo Parkway. All of these were attempts to earmark specific funding, primarily through the budget. So that's another area, I think, of defense. Final area of defense I wanted to touch on is Smart Scale, which has changed our funding prioritization approach, made it much more transparent, has made it much more difficult to fund some of the most destructive projects. And I do think we may see some bills to try to weaken that. It was adopted with very strong bipartisan support. And so hopefully, any changes won't be too serious, but I do expect some attempts, for example, to increase the weight given to congestion reduction and economic development, possibly at the expense of the environment. So those are some of the things we're seeing in terms of defense. Again, I think I want to emphasize the defense. I do think there'll be some positive things. For example, a bill not to add transit money But in the program that was created that can provide some funding for low and no fare transit has a 25% cap right now on that money that can go to low and no fare transit. And there's going to be legislation to remove that cap and turn it into a floor rather than a cap. So I think that's a positive area and one we're hoping we can pass to not give more transit funding, but to be able to use it more for things that are really needed right now, especially like low and no fare transit. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Trip. And thanks for always keeping an eye on all of those bad road projects and where that money is flowing. It is a tricky thing to track, and we're just really lucky to have Trip that is flagging when that stuff happens for us. So thank you for that, for that update. I'm going to pass it over to Skip Stiles, who has been tracking another issue that is hard to kind of keep track of sometimes, which is all of the work that's happening on flood resilience around the Commonwealth, and to give us an update on what we expect on that issue in January. So Skip, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks a lot, Mary. I'm Skip Stiles, Executive Director of Wetlands Watch. The last 2 years have probably been the most productive ever in our work on climate change impacts and resilience. This work falls into two basic categories. The legislative gains that we've made over the last couple of years, which is stuff we have to defend, like Trip was talking about. We've had a lot of defensive work. The other set of initiatives were north of administration, administrative initiatives, which if they are to continue, probably need to be put into statute. So that's sort of where the two buckets we've got. The legislative gains that we've made, the most important was the states joining RGGI, and the monies that flow from RGGI have been the source of funding for the Community Flood Protection Fund, which is a statewide fund to address flooding issues. Virginia joined RGGI, but uniquely we have set-asides. 45% of that money goes to the fund, and we have set-asides for green infrastructure gets a priority, and there's a 25% set aside for low-income areas. So it's a really, really unique program in the country, and so we need to really watch out to protect it. We had legislative changes that put climate change and sea level rise in our tidal wetlands permitting and in our Chesapeake Bay Preservation Act, and also in our septic permitting. Those processes are on, the first two processes have been finished. The septic work just started Monday. So an amazing set of initiatives that is first in the country. No other state has done this work. On the administrative side, we have new VDOT standards for bridges that take climate change into account. We have new rainfall estimates for the state that account for what looks like about an 18% increase in rainfall intensity over the last 20 years. That's going to generate new stormwater standards for the state. And we also have a number of administrative initiatives dealing with environmental justice and resilience. There's also a coastal master plan that will actually be released on Monday that's about 2 years in the making, that puts together a strategy for at least the coastal areas in the state. So a lot to protect in the coming session. And since these programs have attracted the attention of some in the new House leadership and some around Youngkin, we will be kicking into a defensive mode, initially trying to slow things down in the House where we don't have the majority, and then trying to bottle things up in the Senate and committees where we do have a majority, and then making sure that we've still got 21 votes should something leak through and get to the floor of the Senate. The most important piece of this is that Community Flood Preparedness Fund and the RGGI membership. We really need to keep that going. There's $64 million has been raised so far. That's before the auction 2 days ago. So this is a significant source of funding. And the provisions of it that allow for low income set-asides and green infrastructure priorities has to be maintained. There are efforts to put into law some of the Northam administration initiatives. The master planning process needs to be statewide. It needs to include rainfall. It does not currently, and it needs to be updated and renewed. And so there is legislation knocking around drafts that would make permanent the master planning process, and also the advisory process that underlies it, making permanent a technical advisory committee or a scientific advisory committee, so we get the best information about where the climate science is. There are going to be some legislative initiatives, this is sort of on the offense, to try to put a flood board in place to oversee the flood fund. Right now, the flood fund is basically run by the Department of Conservation and Recreation without any sort of citizen oversight. And so there's a lot of work going on to establish some sort of an oversight entity for the fund. We in the conservation community are putting together a set of principles that must be in place regarding how that board is composed, where it's placed, so that the conservation values are retained in the operation of that fund. Finally, there's some drafts floating around that would require local governments to include resilience in their long-range comprehensive plans. There are drafts floating around on that. That would be a welcome step forward. But mostly protecting the body of work that we have and a few legislative initiatives is going to be the game in the next session. Thanks, Mary.
Awesome. So thanks again to Skip, Trip, and Kim. We do have a couple of questions that have come through. One of the biggest ones is around funding. So there was 2 questions on this. One for Kim, is there a specific place where some of the funding you mentioned is could come from? But a tag on to that, which I think either Kim or Trip would probably be able to talk about, is what is the timing and process for the funds from the infrastructure bill? Is that expected to be distributed during this session, or will there be another special session or some other way that those funds will be distributed? So I think we can probably take that question as one massive question, if you will. And Kim,
Yeah,
I
I
don't know if you
think-
want to take the first cut at that, and then Trip, you can tag on. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think in terms of the funding asks for electrification and the rebates, the hope was just to include that as part of the governor's general budgetary ask, which would come from the general fund. Unfortunately, from my understanding, those federal dollars aren't going to be funneled down to our specific funds, although those exist. We have the electric vehicle rebate and then also the electric school bus fund. But to my understanding, federal dollars aren't going to be distributed down to those funds to then be allocated by the Commonwealth. Those will be kind of channeled through the EPA and other federal entities. So unfortunately, that's not going to be a Virginia specific process. And so I don't know, maybe somebody else here, Trip, may have a better understanding of where we generally make those transportation asks, but that is kind of my overview.
So a lot of the transportation money in the Infrastructure Act will flow through some established programs. And so a lot of that allocation won't actually be made by the General Assembly. So in response to the direct question, this session, we probably will not see allocations of that money. And it will largely be done through the Commonwealth Transportation Board rather than the General Assembly. Some of those pots of money will flow through established formulas and channels. There are some others that are going to be competitive grant programs that Virginia can apply and try to get, but won't be guaranteed. And so that will be up to the Commonwealth Transportation Board, VDOT, Department of Rail and Public Transportation to put together the proposals that hopefully we can compete. For example, the rail money, Virginia's in very good shape to get a big chunk of the money that the Infrastructure Act has for rail, because in the past couple of years, we've put together this very strong Transforming Rail in Virginia initiative, which we're very hopeful the new administration will continue. So on the funding front, a lot of this is going to be more administrative rather than within General Assembly session.
Great. Thanks, Trip and Kim. A follow-up question on transportation. Andrea McGimsey from Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions flagged when you talked, Trip, about some of the projects that could potentially happen. Obviously, the Outer Beltway is something that advocates have fought against for years. And at the local level, there is support from local legislators. Do you happen to know if some of the state level Northern Virginia folks are supportive or not? So John Bell, David Reed, others, and any kind of thoughts you have on defense around things like the Outer Beltway or some of the other bad road projects?
So each of these road projects has kind of a different cut sometimes as to who supports and who opposes. It doesn't always at all follow party lines. The Outer Beltway and the particular piece of the Bi-County Parkway is an excellent example. There have been attempts to earmark funding for it or to basically mandate it a number of times over the decades this fight's been going on. And currently you've got the local boards of supervisors that are in Democratic control of both Loudoun and Prince William supporting it. And you've got some splits among the delegation and a number of them who have not taken an express stand. So one of the keys is going to be trying to, get to those members, get them to take a stand at least privately. We'll see. The best strategy usually, since these are typically budget items, is definitely the focus on the appropriations committee members, and also often making the argument that you don't want to get the broader argument. You don't want the General Assembly to be picking projects. That's the whole reason we've adopted the smart scale approach. And so that's one of our strongest policy arguments, is you don't want to get this kind of pork barrel approach to transportation because it's led us to a lot of problems in the past.
Awesome. Thanks, Trip. And then one final question, and Kim, I'm going to point this to you. On the EV infrastructure bills that you walked through, do you think this year there will be any that include requirements for large residential developments to install chargers? So of large residential developments that build their own parking lots or garages needing to have to put in EV infrastructure?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we had a conversation briefly about this last year and earlier this summer about making sure that new residential units include charging infrastructure. That's not something I think, to my knowledge, has been pre-filed for this upcoming session. And so I think the short answer is that's not something VCN is pursuing.
Awesome. Thanks, Kim. Certainly something we have long support from a policy perspective, and hopefully something we can see happen in the future, but maybe not in the short term this year. Well, again, a huge thank you to our Transportation and Resilient Communities panel. Lots to track there, a huge priority, and just want to thank you all so much for taking the time to join us this morning. We are going to switch gears to clean water in our rivers and streams. We've got three panelists, Peggy Sanner from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation to talk about the Bay cleanup goals, Ellie Bamer from Environment Virginia to talk about what's happening with single-use plastics, and Stephanie Rinaldi from Friends of Buckingham to discuss the work on metal mining. So I will kick it first to Peggy Sanner to give us a quick update on Bay cleanup and fisheries. Peggy?
Thank you, Mary, and good morning, everyone. I'm Peggy Sanner, the Chesapeake Bay Foundation Virginia Executive Director, and I'm very pleased to be here to talk about especially the funding that we need to achieve our goal of a restored Chesapeake Bay by 2025. I think most of you all will remember that in 2010, the longstanding effort to restore the Bay gained real traction with the issuance of the Clean Water Blueprint, under which all Bay states and major economic sectors like agriculture, wastewater, septic, and so forth must reduce their pollution by specific amounts of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. Since 2010, Virginia has achieved significant progress, especially in the wastewater treatment area. In fact, enough in the wastewater treatment area so that Virginia can justly claim we're on track to meet our goal. But lots of work needs to be done, especially in agriculture and stormwater, and 2025 is looming. What I want to talk about right now is the fact that the necessary work can only be done if Virginia consistently and adequately funds the existing programs that address each of these pollution sectors. So I'm going to talk about each one of them, and I'm going to provide some numbers to you that the Bay Foundation, working with other partners at VCN, James River Association, the list of water partners is very long, that we all generally agree on. But I'd like to start off by saying the good news is Virginia is in a time of unprecedented financial resources. We have, you probably all have seen revenues at higher levels than really ever before. We have in the Water Quality Improvement Fund an unprecedented amount. This is a fund that comes from surplus over last year's spending, $313 million. And that's a key tool from which Virginia supplies the money needed to reduce pollution in its waterways. There's more money coming from federal resources. There's new opportunities to do bond funding. So the opportunities are there. And one of the most important things I think we need to do is to make sure that legislators recognize that under the Constitution, they have an obligation to take care of land and water, and this is the moment to do it. So going quickly to agriculture. This is, you all know, Virginia's largest industry. It covers the largest land area. Not surprisingly, it's an area that provides significant pollution to our streams and to the bay. We have farmers that have lined up for years for funding from the state under its cost share program so that they can afford to do the key programs, fence cattle out of streams, stop polluted runoff, fix their wastewater, not their wastewater treatment plant, but add riparian buffers. But Virginia has never come close to adequately funding the demand and funding the need. So this year, with, as I said, $313 million or so in the Water Quality Improvement Fund, this is the year when Virginia can put together and implement a budget that fully funds the agricultural cost share program. Number one priority for the Bay. On wastewater, yes, we have made lots of progress, but we have seen that progress, particularly in places along the Potomac River. You can now see habitat, critters, and underwater grasses there that we haven't seen in prior years. We need to make sure that level of progress is the standard that we see across the state. And so we're asking the General Assembly to ensure that we continue that work across the state, including in the 35 or so identified facilities in last year's legislation at the rate of $100 million over the biennium. This is a successful program. We need to keep working on it till we get to the finish line. Stormwater, you all know, everywhere we look, in our urban areas, in our suburban areas, and in our rural areas, we see polluted runoff consisting of precipitation that can no longer infiltrate through the ground because of all the hard and impervious surfaces. What does it do? It runs off the land, down our streets, collecting pollution, going straight to our waterways. Localities need help in fixing these problems. They have probably experienced setbacks in their commitments to these goals because of the pandemic. We want to make sure that there's enough money in the system to take care of the needed work over this biennium. So we're asking for at least $160 million over that period of time. I want to mention the combined sewer system upgrades for a couple of reasons. Tripp mentioned that our incoming governor did not spend too much public time talking about environmental priorities for his administration, but he did mention combined sewer system upgrades. You know, Alexandria, Richmond, Lynchburg, these cities have very old systems that in times of high precipitation combine raw sewage with stormwater and send it straight to our waterways, our James River, our Potomac River. Lynchburg has almost finished its upgrade work. Alexandria needs about $40 million more. Richmond has needs far in excess of that, but we're asking the General Assembly to make another important down payment on Richmond's obligation to clean up the James at about $100 million in this biennium. Really important work, hope to capitalize on the incoming governor's interest in this area. I also want to mention our tree work. You all know we have in trees a hugely important source of myriad environmental services, pollution reduction, flood mitigation, carbon sequestration, provide cooling shade for our cities. And yet we are losing tree cover at a rapid rate every year. What is the solution? There are lots of things we need to do. We expect to have a bill in the General Assembly that will expand localities, authorities to increase their tree canopy. We also are asking the General Assembly to provide just over $6 million to the Department of Forestry to enhance the Department of Forestry's work in several programs, the Virginia Trees for Clean Water program, the Urban Tree Canopy program, and then some funding to assure that our tree inventory in the state is adequate to meet what we hope will be growing needs. Really important need for funding for trees this year. I want to make a quick switch. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Peggy. You can give your quick pitch on your last one, but we need to move on to our next speaker.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Peggy, for tracking everything related to clean water and the Chesapeake Bay. I'm going to take a switch over to Ellie Bamer of Environment Virginia, who's going to give us an update on the single-use plastics work that has made a significant headway over the last few years and what we expect this January. Ellie?
Awesome. Thank you, Mary. Thank you all for having me to talk about plastics today. Yeah, so we have made some improvement in terms of dealing with our huge single-use plastics issue in Virginia, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But first, I want to talk a little bit about the problem. We as a society are continually producing goods that are designed to be used only once or temporarily and then just thrown away. Most of these discarded materials are then landfilled or incinerated, creating pollution and requiring producers to then extract more natural resources to make new materials. We see this with plastics above and away more than any other product, and we end up seeing these single-use products in our waterways. This cycle is having a devastating impact on our environment. It creates an overabundance of single-use products, and then more trash than we can manage. In the last several General Assembly sessions, we've sort of heard a lot about like, well, we need to be recycling more. The issue is our recycling systems are not what they should be. They're not managed properly and they're not holding the correct people responsible for them. Like I mentioned, we have made some progress in this. A focus has been on banning the most harmful single-use plastics. Last year, we were able to secure a victory in banning single-use foam, cups, and takeout containers, and the intentional release of balloons. Governor Northam banned all single-use plastics at state agencies and public colleges and universities. In 2020, localities were given the authority, and just in this last couple months, a few of them have taken up on that of placing a fee on single-use plastic bags. So we're really going to have to play defense on a lot of this stuff. I do think that we have, with 5 localities having passed plastic bag fees, I do think that that might be a little safer. There may be attempts to revisit, especially the single-use foam. Luckily, we did have some bipartisan support with that. So, I have been meeting with our champs and from the Republicans, and I think that's going to be important to continue to do to make sure that we see that actually go into effect, which will be in 2023 for large restaurants. In addition to playing defense, we obviously have priorities going forward. Like, how do we fix this issue where we're just creating so much stuff? We can't just ban everything. We get that feedback, like we can't just ban absolutely everything. So we need to fix waste management. So we need to do this by increasing product recyclability and incentivizing recycling. So rather than the burden being placed on localities and the general public, producers and consumers should be responsible for the cost of litter cleanups, recycling, and waste disposal. A big idea around this is called extended producer responsibility, or product stewardship. Polluters pay. There's a lot of different names. I think we're trying to figure out what the catchiest one is. Extended producer responsibility, I'm pretty sure, is not the catchiest, but it is a really great policy approach. It shifts and puts significant responsibility for the environmental costs and even the physical costs of cleaning up a product to the producers. It's really essential for moving Virginia towards zero waste and a circular economy. The strategy has been proven to work in other places. Oregon and Maine just adopted this, and it provides a bigger incentive to have products that actually can be recyclable or don't have such harmful toxic chemicals within them. It's a exciting idea. And the reason that we are pursuing this above other plastic policies this year is because we actually anticipate there to be a bad extended producer responsibility bill. And it's nice to be able to fight with what we actually want to see in it. And so the whole point of this is to reduce source reduction. So we want to prioritize reducing, redesigning, and reusing products. We want to set high standards for recycling within this. And we want to make sure that producers are finally accountable for their end-of-life products. This should be done with public programs and high community input. That's a key component that is often not in these bad bills that we are seeing pop up. And it should be guided by public oversight. That's another key component that is oftentimes left out of these other bills. It should ban incineration of covered products and packaging. That's another important aspect that we don't see in some of these bad versions that we want to ensure. We also want to minimize toxic substances. So if we get this recycling, composting all figured out, we don't want to be recycling and composting toxins. So we shouldn't be having those in there as well. And the last key principle is to ensure equity in worker health and safety. That's a very important aspect of waste management that has been overlooked oftentimes. And by including that within an extended producer responsibility bill, we can ensure that waste management going forward is safer, healthier, and more equitable for the people working in it, as well as the communities surrounding it. I think it'll be, sorry, that's all I was gonna say. I was just gonna wrap up and say, I think it'll be a fight, but that's what I got, so.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ellie. Really appreciate it. Thanks for all of the work that you all have done over the past few years to make so much progress, and excited for this next phase of the campaign. Really appreciate it. Our final speaker on this panel is Stephanie Rinaldi. I just want to give a huge shout out before she speaks for the amazing work that Friends of Buckingham has done over the last few years, particularly on their work to fight against the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. They quickly shifted once they found out that there was the prospecting for gold in the region, and now have expanded that overall to metal mining threats in the region and throughout Virginia. So excited to introduce Stephanie to talk a little bit about what that will mean for the General Assembly in January. Stephanie, take it away.
Mary. Yes, I'm Stephanie Rinaldi with Friends of Buckingham. I'm also coordinator of the new Press Pause Coalition. I apologize for being a disembodied voice today. I am speaking to you from the beautiful and rural Buckingham, where we have not yet gotten high-speed internet. So I will ask Mary, if there's ever issues with my audio, please just jump in and let me know. But I do have this lovely slideshow for you, so hopefully that makes up for it. I'm going to give you just a quick overview of the metals mining issue, since it is a little bit newer. I think somebody is unmuted.
Sorry.
I'm just going to keep going. So just really quickly, currently there is ongoing exploration for gold, copper, lead, and zinc happening in multiple Virginia counties. This is a newer development, started with gold exploration last year and has expanded to these other metals. And all of these metals are commonly mined in the same way. And that is by using open pit mines, so digging massive mines that extend well below the water table and expand to encompass hundreds of acres. The mine sites encompass thousands of acres because they also include these immense piles of mine waste that are held back by earthen dams, mine tailing dams. And these mine sites also have huge purpose-built ponds for storing the cyanide solution that is used to extract metals from the ore. So some of the issues that can occur with this, the depths of the mines require dewatering because they go below the water table. That draws down the water table, and these earthen dams often fail, releasing a torrent of polluted waste into the surrounding areas, as happened with the deadly consequences in Brazil just a few years ago. The cyanide ponds are also known to leach into the ground, polluting the soil and the groundwater. And most troubling, of course, for us is that these operations could have devastating impacts on Virginia's drinking water. This map shows the location of Virginia's gold pyrite belt, our sources of drinking water near that belt. So this belt is a geological formation that has many of the sought after metals and is one indicator of where the industry is likely to place future mines. So dam failures and toxic spills at mines in this area would almost immediately impact these drinking water sources that you can see here. And these are the sources of drinking water for over 3 million Virginians. And this map only addresses one indicator of potential future mine sites. So that brings us to the legislative aspect of this issue. This style of mining has never been conducted in Virginia, so our regulations don't properly address it. We are asking the General Assembly to address this new threat of metals mining by pressing pause on the issuance of permits for the mining of gold, copper, lead, and zinc, while they evaluate the Commonwealth's regulations and Virginia's ability to protect its citizens from the negative impacts of mining these metals. Several of VCN members have worked on this bill, and we recently secured a House patron, which is exciting. I can't tell you who it is yet, but we have one. Just really quick, a couple of points of opposition that we will probably hear. One being that this industry could provide jobs to areas that most need them. This is not usually the case. Usually these companies that mine in these areas will bring in their own workers from elsewhere. They need specialist workers, so they don't often give jobs to the community where they're mining. And then another potential objection may be that some of these metals are utilized in green energy technology, which is true, but green energy is only green if it can be produced in a way that is safe for the environment. And according to the EPA's toxic release inventory, metal mining is the nation's #1 toxic polluter. So not so green unless we figure out how to address the issue. So for us, it's just common sense to pause the permitting until the General Assembly has the opportunity to review and address the dangers that this industry poses. And that's it.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie. And I know many people are working to get broadband throughout Virginia. So thank you for joining us via audio and appreciate all of that feedback. We unfortunately are out of time with this panel, so can't take some of the good questions that have come in. But what I'll say is for any questions that come in that we're not able to get to with the full group, we will email those directly to the speakers and make sure that we can get back to you with answers to your questions. So don't want to hold that back from people asking questions. There's some good things that are coming through. I'll also remind folks there's never enough time during the General Assembly preview, which is why we added this year longer educational series, which are all up on our website. So if you want to hear more about any of these issues, we will also link to all of the hour-long presentations that happened throughout the fall that were more background on the issue and less specific on the legislation, because of course we didn't know that information as well as we do now. So we'll make sure to get all of that information to you if you want to dig into any of these issues further, from metals to plastics to Bay. So thank you again to Peggy and Ellie and Stephanie for your presentations. Really appreciate it. We are going to go to our next panel, which is on land conservation and wildlife. I'm excited to have two speakers for this. Zachary Sheldon of the Nature Conservancy to talk about land conservation and trails funding, and Susan Holmes from the Wildlands Network to talk about the incredible work that's been happening over the last few years, including this January on wildlife corridors. Zachary, I'll kick it to you first.
Thanks, Mary. Good morning, everyone. Land conservation has been a long-term priority of the community, and it's going to be a similar theme of really what we're focusing on, where a lot of it is just money. Budget requests have always really been a focus of ours, and as the pandemic's shown, there's been a huge demand for open spaces, for parks and areas to get outside, and we've seen, and it's really laid bare how inequitable some of that distribution is, the access to lands. And so what we've been pushing for currently with the governor's outgoing budget is just really huge influxes of funding to our existing land conservation programs. The Virginia Land Conservation Foundation awards grants, the Virginia Farmland Preservation Fund, Virginia Battlefield Preservation Fund. We're asking for increased funding for all of those. And one recommendation we do have, and we'll see if it gets included in the budget, was the creation of a new fund, just shortly called the Outdoor Recreation Community Access Fund. And that would be, to help address some of the inequities in urban conservation, underserved communities, just realizing that the existing tools are good at what they do, but there are areas they're lacking. We're trying to find new ways to address that. Is to be seen if the governor will put anything in his budget. And currently, I don't believe we have anything pre-filed. It's a big ask, but it's a focus moving ahead. So it's a very short version of the land conservation. From the trails, again, it's similar. Looking at funding, we do have, there was some American Rescue Plan funding that went towards trails, and as part of that, there was a work group, a study to provide recommendations to the General Assembly on additional work to get trails moving forward in Virginia. And that final report isn't out yet, but some of the things we're anticipating and there will be legislation on includes a statewide trails plan, as well as establishing a state trails office that would oversee some of the trails programs, because both DCR or the Department of Conservation and Recreation and the Department of Transportation both have roles in trail development. And so coordinating across these agencies is an important part of that. As I said, though, money is always a big driver here. And so something that we've been working on, coalition has, is dedicated funding, because no matter how much we talk to the General Assembly members about funding, we're never going to get enough in just the general appropriations process. And so what dedicated funding would do is it would provide the funding that, at a regular reoccurring basis, and fund these programs and establish some of these new programs as well. And so we've been talking with the outgoing administration. The hope of this, currently the strategy is, our hope is he will include some of these priorities in his outgoing budget that we can then rally around and fight for as the General Assembly passes their budget. And then after this session is really when we get a larger full package, using that groundwork, as we talked about some of these existing programs, to then push forward for a more expansive proposal that helps address some of the lackings in the current existing programs. That's the short version. I'll just leave it there for now and try to make up some time.
Thanks, Zach. Really appreciate it. Excited to introduce Susan from Wildlands Network to talk a little bit about the wildlife corridors work. Susan.
Thanks, Mary, and good morning, everyone, and thank you all for your support of wildlife corridors in the past. I have just a very short summary of what we're looking at this year. As many of you know, the Virginia legislature has passed 2 wildlife corridor bills to date in the last 2 sessions. The first one initiate a wildlife corridor action plan to identify wildlife corridors and hotspots across the state. And that is still in process, but is due out next year. And the second one was directing the agencies to incorporate wildlife corridors and connectivity into their planning processes. Both of those bills passed with overwhelming bipartisan support, which is great in this environment now. And this is an issue that is getting a lot of traction in states around the country, as well as at the federal level, all with bipartisan support, which is really exciting to see in the conservation space. As many of you may know, the bills previously were led by Senator Marsden and Delegate Bulova. Senator Marsden is eager to continue to build on the success of the past and is looking to introduce legislation that would fund and implement the wildlife corridors that are identified as part of the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. So while there's no legislation, we have not seen legislative language to date. What we're looking at in all likelihood is something that would provide the necessary funds for protecting wildlife corridors and particularly some of those road crossing hotspots that are identified in the state. Taking a quick step, those of you who may not be familiar with this issue, but wildlife corridors and road road mitigation is an issue that is increasingly catching on around the country, but particularly in Virginia, you all have 72, I'm looking at my cheat sheet here, over 70,000 miles of road that sort of fragment the landscape and are ranked 12 in the country for vehicle deer collisions. So Virginia is a state where clearly there's a huge need. We know wildlife needs to move. We know that they are crossing roads a lot, and we know that those roads are fragmenting the landscapes, and particularly in a world of climate change, this is one of the key tools that we have in order to protect biodiversity and to safeguard humans as well. So it's been an issue, as I said, that it's getting a lot more attention. And one of the things that's very exciting is in the infrastructure package that recently passed with bipartisan support. This is the big federal infrastructure package. There is $350 million for states over the next 5 years to protect wildlife corridors and specifically to build road crossings. This is a new federal program and one that is going to bring potential matching dollars to anything that Virginia can come up with in legislation. So we're very excited about that. The match, we anticipate that the federal government would pay for 80% of any project, so that the Virginia would just have to come up with that, likely that 20% in terms of funding for road crossings. I think I'm trying to think of other things I can add. This year in this round, we're also appreciative of Delegate Tran, who is interested in also perhaps legislation in this space, and we're going to be looking to her to see if she has also some ideas about how safeguard funding or create a fund for wildlife crossings moving forward. So that's sort of the quick summary. We don't have legislative language yet, but we're working closely with Senator Marsden and are eager to see what he comes up with in terms of funding and implementation of the previous two bills, and excited about building bipartisan support for this, and think there's a lot of potential for that in this new legislative session.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susan and Zachary. We have one question that came in. I did want to flag, there was another question that came in for Stephanie on the last panel that I did get an answer to, and I thought was worth lifting up. Folks were interested in knowing the company behind the gold prospecting and metal mining. And Stephanie just wrote back that it's the Aston Bay Holdings, which is a Canadian junior mining company that are currently exploring in Buckingham, Campbell, and Pittsylvania County. So thank you, Stephanie, for getting back on that with that one question. Susan, we do have a question for you on the wildlife corridor work from Jim Wilson of Trout Unlimited. How can organizations get involved with the agencies that are working on the wildlife corridor action plan right now? What's the best way for groups to engage in that process, or individuals?
That is such a good question. I'm going to have to sort of punt that to my colleagues in Virginia who've been working more closely with the agencies, such as Misty Bowes. Unfortunately, Misty of Wild Virginia could not be on the call today, but I think she would be best equipped to answer that question. I know we've all been eager to try to provide information to the team that's working on the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. I think Misty's had the most recent contacts, so I would refer you to her. And I agree with you. I think it would be great in order to make sure that they have the best information. We're particularly interested in that aquatic connectivity piece and hoping to really raise that up. So underscore, yes, I think it's important, but I think Misty's probably your go-to on that.
Awesome. Zach, do you happen to know the answer to that question while we've got you?
I don't have an easy answer. I was just looking up the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative may be the best. Department of Wildlife Resources is a part of that. And I assume when they finally do start doing some more of the public outreach, they'll be utilizing that. So that's just, if you want to Google that, because I can't put it into the chat, but they may have a little more information there. But I think, yeah, Misty would be the best equipped to answer that.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Zach. If you send it to me, I can send it out
Okay.
to the full list too. Awesome. And a follow-up question, I think related to the funding piece. So similarly, we were kind of talking earlier with the transportation folks, like how is this money going to start to actually move through? I think a similar question to the extent, Susan, that you know, or there is an answer yet. As some of this federal money starts to flow, what does that actually look like? And how will that be able to be accessed by localities, by the state? Is a process set up by that already?
Yeah, that is such a good question and one that we're getting a lot. Right. So the Department of Transportation, the Federal Department of Transportation has just put out their initial website for all of the funds, not just the pilot program, but all of the funds flowing from the new transportation bill. I'm happy, Mary, to send that link to you if that's useful as well. Right now, it's sort of a boilerplate. They're taking public comments on it, but they have not put out any official word on timing and really detailed process, beyond the bill language itself, which again, I'm happy to forward you. We have a one pager that is it's a good summary of what's in the bill and who's eligible and the criteria and all of that. And I'm happy to forward that to you. It doesn't speak to some of the questions I think you're getting to, though, about timing and process. We're all waiting to see. We don't believe there's going to be a rulemaking for the pilot program. And I should emphasize the pilot program is one of several opportunities for states in terms of crossing funding. It's not the only one. So we are going to be Wildlands, and I think some of the other groups too, but Wildlands is going to be putting together a sort of a primer for states so that they can understand how to access these funds and answer that question. But we are waiting for some of that information ourselves. So we anticipate early in 2022, by January, we should be seeing a lot more information about timing and process, and maybe if past is prologue, funds, applications for those funds would happen around spring, but that's just more of a guess at this point.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Susan. And certainly for all of the funding that we're expecting, both from the infrastructure bill and hopefully from the Build Back Better bill on a lot of our policy priorities, VCN will doing the best we can to keep track of that and keep partners apprised of how they can make sure that those funds go into the right places for the right program. So thank you again, Susan and Zachary, for those updates and for all the work you all are doing on land conservation, trails, and wildlife corridors. We're going to move to our next panel on clean energy and utility reform. Another place where we have made some significant progress over the last few years, where we'll need to maintain that momentum and also look for some, I think, pretty exciting potential bipartisan opportunities to continue the work. So our panel is of 3 individuals: Mary Stewart Torbeck of the Sierra Club Virginia chapter, Austin Counts from Appalachian Voices, and Laura from Clean Virginia. So I will start off with Mary Stewart. Go ahead.
Hey, folks. All right. So we heard Skip Stiles speak earlier about the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative regarding flooding. In addition to RGGI funds addressing flooding, 50% of those revenues are allocated for low-income energy efficiency programs, which amounts to over $100 million in annual funding for that work. So it'll be a priority for those working in the energy field to defend RGGI and make sure that Virginia remains in the RGGI program, as well as ensuring that these funds continue to go to support that low-income energy efficiency work, which provides critical funding for Virginians who are the most vulnerable to experiencing a high energy burden. So meaning that their bills are disproportionately higher than others. In addition, on the defense side, in 2020, Virginia passed the landmark Virginia Clean Economy Act, commonly known as the VCEA. The VCEA dramatically reshaped energy policy in Virginia by putting the Commonwealth on a path towards a clean, efficient energy grid by transitioning Virginia's utilities to 100% clean energy, helping Virginians cut their electricity bills, cutting emissions, and readily shrinking Virginia's reliance on fossil fuels, and making it easier for all Virginians to go solar. Governor-elect Youngkin has stated publicly that he would not have signed this bill into law and believes that we need to see more cheap natural gas in Virginia. Of course, as we all know, natural gas isn't cheap, and we will see a 30% increase in that cost this winter alone, but certainly have our work cut out for us to protect Virginia's clean energy future. Several other Republican leaders have also expressed concerns about the VCEA and wanting to roll back components of this. Because the VCEA was such a large bill with many components to it, it will not be easy to overturn it in its entirety. However, we do anticipate that certain pieces will be attacked and unfortunately don't yet have a lot of clarity as to which pieces those will be. So we're currently working to form a grassroots coalition to help ensure that the Virginia legislature knows what pathway we want. Grassroots advocacy was instrumental in passing this sweeping legislation, and I will share some more details here in a minute about how to get involved if you're interested in that. Then for some good news, there are 2 energy efficiency bills that we will be working on in 2022. Energy efficiency in Virginia has historically had bipartisan support. It is an important piece of reducing our overall energy use as well as energy costs. And the VCEA enacted Virginia's first mandatory energy efficiency standard, known as an EERS. This was mandatory for Virginia utilities, which requires them to offer energy efficiency measures and rebates to Virginia families and businesses. Unfortunately, this expires in 2025. Therefore, we're working on a bill that will make sure that the utilities have to continue prioritizing energy efficiency after 2025 and sets incremental targets for the utilities to have to achieve. The last but not least bill is a low-income energy efficiency bill that changes existing language in the Virginia Code to allow for fuel switching, which would allow for funds from the RGGI low-income energy efficiency work to switch homes from dirty fossil fuels such as propane and gas to all electric. Getting Virginians off the gas system reduces our reliance on fossil fuels and improves overall health. And this bill would also allow for electrification in the utility-run energy efficiency programs. So with that being said, I mentioned grassroots and know that a lot of y'all have been very active with this, and we certainly will need all of y'all support. So I wanted to mention that on Monday, December the 14th, the Sierra Club will be hosting a grassroots conversation focused on a General Assembly preview from 6:30 to 8 p.m. And all of the pieces I just talked about will be gone into in much more detail. So if you are interested, save the date for that. And I'm actually going to, I think I can drop my email into the chat here. So folks can just reach out to me if you're interested in learning more about any of these pieces or helping to support our work during this upcoming session.
Awesome. Thank you, Mary Stewart. And if you're not able to do that, I can share your contact information with everyone as well. Next is Austin from Appalachian Voices to talk about solar and work on a just transition to clean energy. Austin, take it away.
Thanks, Mary. Hey, everyone. So one of the major solar efforts we've been working on this year is expanding access to what's called shared solar, kind of formerly known as community solar. Several of you all may remember that in 2020, legislation was passed that required specifically Dominion Energy to create shared solar programs for their customers. Shared solar would essentially give access to solar energy for anybody in a community, no matter their income, no matter their housing situation, if they rent, if they own, or if they're kind of in disrepair, or anything else that may restrict their options to go solar, such as shading, and really a ton of other potential barriers. And so this is generally done by setting up a localized solar array that can essentially generate electricity that's shared out amongst the community, no matter whether you're a government, whether you're a resident, or even a small business. And so unfortunately in this bill, Appalachian Power and Old Dominion Power were originally included, but were removed later on, essentially leaving out all of Southwest Virginia in the process. And as well as some of the most coal impacted communities in the Commonwealth. So to address this issue, we've been working throughout the year, and we're continuing to work with a bill to expand shared solar programs to Appalachian Power and Old Dominion Power territory. We've been working with Senator Edwards and Senator Hanger's office to submit these bills to legislative services on Monday, and they plan on co-sponsoring the bills during session. And so that's really exciting to hear that solar energy, especially low-income accessible solar energy, isn't only going to be available in Dominion territory. There's also a separate, more broad bill coming from some other solar energy folks, such as the Coalition for Community Solar Access, that would essentially improve upon the program statewide, whether it's just with Dominion or whether we are able to expand it to Appalachian Power and Old Dominion Power territory as well. And they're working with Delegate Wilt right now as he's kind of considering patroning the bill. And if that doesn't work out, they seem to have a potential backup as well. So hopefully we'll see both of those bits of legislation coming up in 2022. And as an additional, not side note, but an additional benefit from this is that this kind of shared solar work recently got a big boost from Virginia Energy as they released their report called Re-Energizing Southwest Virginia that specifically mentions the need to expand shared solar to the region, to Southwest Virginia specifically. So we're going to be making sure to utilize that report going forwards pretty heavily. And I'm more than happy to share that with anyone if they'd like to reach out. And I was going to share the link to a page where you can sign up to support, but I think I'm going to have to send that to our host and maybe she can share that.
Send it my way. I'm happy to pass it around. Thanks, Austin.
No problem, thanks. Then one other bit that we're working on as far as transitioning to renewable energy or a just transition in the area is that we're also working to help get the Brightfields program funded for next year. For those of you who may not have been around during the Brightfields push, the program would essentially incentivize solar development specifically on brownfields and former mine lands in Southwest Virginia. Though the program was created this year through legislation and was introduced by Delegate Kilgore, who's soon to be our new majority leader, it wasn't actually allocated any funding from the state. So recently we've been working with VCN to get a letter to Governor Northam asking him to include funding for the Brightfields program in his budget next year. However, if we don't get the program in the budget initially, we're still planning to work with Delegate Kilgore to submit a budget amendment and hopefully get the program funded pretty soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Austin, for all of the work that you all are doing, particularly in the Southwest Virginia area of the state. We really appreciate it. We've got one more speaker on this panel, and then we'll open it up to questions. Laura from Clean Virginia to talk a little bit more about utility reform. Laura?
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for the invitation. And I would like to start with the good news in utility reform issues. Some of you might know that the State Corporation Commission concluded the 2021 review of rates for Dominion Energy, where the regulator examined the earnings of the company in the last 4 years and set the future rates the utility should collect from customers to cover all their costs and a fair profit. And thanks to a key rate reform bill that many of you helped pass in 2020, HB 528, the regulator was able to reveal that Dominion Energy overcharged customers for more than $1.1 billion since 2017. This bill was key to enable the State Corporation Commission to reveal these overcharges, and it helped customers receive more than $303 million in refunds, a rate cut of $50 million and $309 million worth of investments in the offshore wind pilot. Without this bill, without HB 528, nothing of this would have been possible. And although it's not a total victory, this was a critical step to keep advancing the clean energy transition in an affordable way. And so finally, without HB 528, Dominion would have kept this $1.1 billion it overcharged customers, making electricity bills higher and making it more expensive than it actually is to transition to clean energy. However, the State Corporation Commission was only the State Corporation, remember that the State Corporation Commission was only allowed to decrease rates by 50 million, but the commission analysis showed that rates are still higher than they should be. So we need to change the way electric utility monopolies do their business in Virginia. We need to align their interests with the interest of customers and the interest of the planet. We cannot allow them to use a monopoly power to make excessive profits, making cheap, clean energy more expensive than it is. So from the State Corporation and State Corporation Commission analysis in this rate case, it is clear that Dominion is still over collecting more than is fair from customers. And it's also interesting to see how electric monopolies have been charging in excess for the old system, and we need to make sure that the new system is priced fairly and the transition is affordable. So some key things that our bills will work on is that electric utility monopolies are failing to advance least cost implementation of the Virginia Clean Economy Act and are still using accounting gimmicks to keep overcharging customers. And our bills aim at stopping these problems and procure quick and sustainable transition to clean energy. So I'm going to conclude there. Thank you so much for having me, Mary, and I'm looking forward for the discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you specifically for Laura for squeezing us in. She had a very busy day today and really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and talk about your work. I have a couple of questions that have come in for you, Austin, to start about shared solar in co-op territory. So can you talk a little bit about if any of these asks or legislative programs are specifically targeted at the co-op territory, specifically around shared solar or any of the solar work, how that works in co-op territory?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, there are several different bills planning to be introduced, and actually overall there's 3. And the bills co-sponsored by Senator Hanger and Senator Edwards. There's actually 2 bills that they're kind of considering co-patroning. One is going to be specifically for investor-owned utilities, so Dominion Energy, Old Dominion, Appalachian Power. And then another one that's going to be specifically trying to expand it for co-ops across the state. And so other than that difference, I'm not sure of a ton of difference in that language, but there are still efforts on expanding those programs to co-ops as well. And I believe the Coalition for Community Solar Access bill may still have co-ops included in that, but I'm not really sure. So I do know at least one of those bills plan to expand to cooperatives.
Awesome. And were Dominion and Appalachian areas exempted from shared solar because of their opposition? And are they continuing to oppose shared solar? It's another question that came in.
Yeah, and a quick clarification, just because of Dominion, we do have a really small 1 county wide investor-owned utility in Southwest Virginia called Old Dominion Power. And it's actually a subsidiary of Kentucky Utility. So whenever I say Dominion, that's generally what I'm talking about. But yeah, so Appalachian Power and Old Dominion Power were able to get removed from the bill because of their opposition, and we do expect them to oppose these bills coming up.
Awesome, great, thank you. Laura, I think this is for you, though, Austin, you may be able to touch on it too. On the State Corporation Commission, what's happening with a community solar charge proposal of $65 to $75 a month? Are you aware of that? And do either of you know what's happening with that at the SEC right now?
Austin, I'm going to let you answer what if the State Corporation Commission has reached a final order. But I understand this 75 minimum bill will essentially make it harder for customers to subscribe to these shared solar projects, and yeah, making it more harder to develop shared solar. I don't know where the SEC is right now.
Yeah, and I know there's some litigation efforts kind of going on there, as well as people adamantly just saying, okay, this is going to kill shared solar for all of Virginia. And if that gets expanded, it's possible that that's an issue across the state. I don't know if they came to a formal decision yet, but I'd be happy to keep everybody updated as we learn a little bit more there. But just to kind of give a little bit of scale, the idea is around $70 for a connection fee. And and to participate in those programs. Whereas right now, as just a resident, the minimum bill that I pay for Old Dominion Power, which is actually a little bit higher than an Appalachian Power, is just around $11, $12. And so a real significant change if you're looking at people trying to save money on their electricity bill, because that's so often one of the major goals for shared solar is that we want people to save. We don't just want to go green. We actually want to see an economic benefit for low to moderate income families as well.
Great. Thank you both. And I just got pinged that an order has not been issued yet, confirmed. So we will make sure to keep folks up to date on that and what happens next. Mary Stewart, this question is for you. Obviously, the Clean Economy Act was a pretty comprehensive policy. You talked about this a little bit, that pieces of it may be tapped as in addition to a kind of a full repeal of our ability to get to zero carbon utility grid by 2050. Is there any piece of the Clean Economy Act that you think is more at risk than another? What do you expect? Do you expect a full kind of a full repeal of the Clean Economy Act, or kind of to tinker around the edges?
I do expect that it'll be a lot easier to go after particular pieces of it than a full repeal. But based on the narrative that we're seeing from Republicans, I do think that the goals in it to retire fossil fuel generating plants by 2050 will be, one that is certainly of interest there. As again, seeing that coal and natural gas are two things that Republicans do seem to want to try to further elevate their reliance on. So I also could, that's pure speculation because again, such a large sweeping bill. But one other component that potentially concerns me would be some folks trying to get rid of the energy efficiency standard in that. And the reason for that is there was a 2-year gas moratorium in the Clean Economy Act that will expire January 1st of 2022. However, it also, within that, as long as the utilities are not meeting their energy efficiency targets, they cannot get permits for new fossil fuel generating plants. So that's another piece certainly we'll have our eyes on. The energy efficiency wouldn't be the concern there. Again, that being a pretty bipartisan issue, has gotten lots of support across the aisle, but with that prohibiting the utilities from being able to bring new plants online. So those are the two jumping out at me. As I mentioned, there are lots of components there. And we'll obviously be tracking and updating folks, I think, very often, as we get into session and in those first couple weeks.
Awesome. Well, again, Laura, Mary Stewart, Austin, thank you so much for joining us for this panel. So much to cover in a short period of time, and we really appreciate the updates. Thank you so much. And we are going to transition to our last panel here on good government. So all of the ways that we can ensure that our government is working in a transparent way that allows as much of the public to be engaged as possible. We've got two panelists. We have Queen Shabazz from the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative here to talk about some of the core environmental justice components that have been passed into law the last few years and what that lies ahead, and Anna Killius of the James River Association to talk about public participation in state agencies and the General Assembly heading into January. Queen, have you called in? I know you're on the road today. Are you here?
Hey, Mary, she emailed about needing a number and I just sent it to her. So maybe we could give her a little bit of time to.
Perfect. Why don't Anna, you go first? Thank you for keeping an eye on email. Yeah, she's traveling back down from New York, so I was calling in as a passenger today. But Anna, why don't you go ahead and go first, and then we'll have Queen follow you.
Awesome. So I'll first give a very quick thank you to everyone for your time and your dedication to helping us accomplish this really fantastic conservation agenda that you've heard about. And you've heard a lot of really great information about a lot of very important issues. But a key part of moving any of these policies forward is going to be our collective ability to publicly participate in all the mechanisms of government. And that means whether we can watch our legislative committees in action and give testimony about the bills as they come up, our ability to view the public meetings that our citizen boards are holding so that we can see and comment on the actions of our environmental agencies. And then our ability to participate in panels and committees that really help draft the regulations that are supposed to keep our polluters responsible for what they're releasing into our environment. Virginia's Freedom of Information Act laws control how all of these meetings are run and our ability to view and participate in them. And for years, our FOIA laws have really valued completely in-person access. There's good reason for that, right? If you're in the room watching these conversations happen, there's a lot you can read from people's interactions. And when you're standing in front of them talking, that carries a lot of weight. But with COVID, we saw that modern technology can really create new opportunities for virtual access. And we need to open these new ways for the public to see and have a say in the government. That can include things like live streamed meetings, video conference participation, and then testifying through electronic means. This helps folks stay involved despite transportation concerns, like perhaps Queen is experiencing right now, long distance commutes, childcare needs, accessibility for disabled individuals, and more. We can't make a 100-mile journey all the time to sit in a hotel conference room for hours to give our 2 cents in 2 minutes. But if our government can meet us where we are, that can go a long way to bringing in new audiences and new communities. So we're working on legislation that will help amend our FOIA laws to create these new opportunities, allow for them to come into these spaces. It's a really complicated conversation. It includes more than the conservation community. We have to worry about Virginia's press and their accessibility, local governments, because all of this, impacts them too, our open government advocates. So there's not much I can say right now because we're still in the middle of that conversation. But when the time comes, we're going to need you to make it very clear that Virginians value this sort of access and this ability to participate. So we'll be asking you to kind of chime in and make it clear that this is important to all of us, and will make government better.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anna. And I believe we've gotten the correct number to Queen. So I'm going to see one more time, Queen, if you're able to unmute yourself and speak. Okay. Let's see, if Chris is on, I think we can transition to get the political lay of the land while we try and help Queen navigate the technology here. So Chris, are you on, and can we transition quickly to going from what we kind of expect to what some of the political lay of the land is? Do we have him on yet? All right, we don't. Why don't we take a quick 3-minute break while I try and get Queen's technology working. Thanks everyone. We are always live and in a world of technology like Anna was just talking about, where sometimes it works perfectly and sometimes it doesn't. We just need to give ourselves a quick moment. So folks will just hold on one moment. I'm going to try and get Queen on the line and see if we can get her technology fixed. So we'll start back up again at 11.
Mary, I'm on if you can hear me.
Haha, there you are. Yes, perfect.
Thanks. And those who sent me the dial-in number.
Thank you. And sorry about the technology. I know you were traveling. Well, Queen, we would love to hear from you to give the quick update on what is happening from an environmental justice policy perspective headed into this General Assembly session. So please go ahead and take it away.
Glad to. Thank you, Mary. And good Friday, everyone. So we'll start. We will not be doing an omnibus strategy this year, which is what we attempted last year. But two key priorities will be reintroducing the permitting bill from last year with emphasis on community involvement in the permitting process, consideration of cumulative impacts and environmental justice. We'll also be reintroducing our locality comprehensive plan bill from last year with emphasis on comprehensive plan and including an environmental justice strategy. And two our top defensive policy priorities are that we're doing all our efforts to protect the environmental justice gains that we've made in the state, which includes the Virginia Environmental Justice Act, and any regressive amendments and repeal efforts. We're looking to protect investments in environmental justice overall within the Office of DEQ. That's the EJ office itself, the new EJ director, Renee Hoyas, as well as the 4 newly hired environmental justice coordinators. And they're going through training this month, and I'll be meeting with the 4 of them on next week. And also protecting the interagency working group that's being led by DEQ. And we currently, the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative currently has members on the EJ Council, or they are monitoring the interagency work group. And we have at least 2 members on the regulatory advisory panel for site suitability, the RAP. And that's all I have for now. I'll turn it back over to you, Mary, and thanks for this opportunity to share.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And we do have a minute or so if anybody has any questions for either Queen or Anna. Are there any questions? Okay, great. Well, I just want to thank both Queen and Anna, but particularly Queen, for the work that the collaborative has been doing over the last few years. There is much progress just in terms of opening up government to be more accessible by the public. There is still, as Queen knows, a long, long way to go. But I think some of the progress that has been made and being able to hold on to what DEQ, the small things they have done, will be really critical over the next few years. So excited to be helpful partners in that work. Okay, now we are going to transition. So just as a reminder, there's a couple of places where you can find a lot of this information, and I'm going to go ahead and put this all in the chat. One, there is our common agenda, which is the broader written document that has been crafted and written by the partners that have presented today, that was published in August, that laid out the background on all of the issues that you've heard about and lays the policy opportunities out for those. Second, then, for each of those chapters, there was an hour-long presentation this fall by all of the authors to walk through the content, both the problems, the solutions, and the policy opportunities. And I'll make sure that you all have links to watch those in case any of these you wanted to dig into just a little bit more and get more information on. And in both of those places, the contact information for the authors, which is also those who have spoken today, is available in those documents. So you can follow up if you have more questions or are wondering how you can get more involved in any of the issues or weigh in more specifically. So we're going to transition now to hearing from Chris Lane at the League of Conservation Voters to, again, just give us a little bit more of a lay of the land of what things may look like in January. Again, recognizing that our organizations and many organizations are nonpartisan C3 organizations, but it is important to understand what the political lay of the land is, to understand what issues may have more ability or less ability, and also just the mechanics of how things will work in the upcoming General Assembly session. So Chris, I'll pass it over to you. Hopefully you're able to get yourself unmuted now.
Yes, thank you, Mary, for dealing with my technical difficulties there.
No problem. Thanks, Chris. Welcome.
So this year's elections, as many of you know, resulted in a major transition of power for the General Assembly from the Democratic control in the House with a 5-seat majority to a 2-seat Republican majority. That's a total of a 7-seat swing in the House, as well as and perhaps most consequentially, an administrative swing at the top of the tickets. This resulted in a Governor-elect Glenn Youngkin, Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, who is going to preside over the Senate. She will cast tie-breaking votes in the event that the Senate comes 2020 off the floor. And then J.C. Meares will be the incoming Attorney General, where he will serve as the Commonwealth's lawyer and make decisions on several cases or potential decisions, and choosing up to take cases that are important to environmental justice concerns, potentially utility regulation, et cetera. And the overall, there were 17 newly elected officials in the General Assembly. So we are going to be seeing, yet again, an influx of, this is a little under a fifth of the House of Delegates, is going to involve new members. Well, with the exception of Tim Anderson, who's going to be resuming a seat. And what this means for the General Assembly is, for the first time in 8 years, we're going to see a major transition in the appointments at the secretary level. Important to us, this means a new Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, potentially a new Secretary of Agriculture and Forestry, as well as Secretary of Finance. And so a big shift is going to be in these top level positions. In terms of the political repercussions, things that came out on the campaign trail, as Mary Stewart mentioned, the Virginia Clean Economy Act is going to be something where that has come up on the campaign trail and is likely to arise. And the other thing to keep in mind is as Ellie mentioned, with the transition of off of single-use plastics, this was something that occurred through executive order. So any progress that we made on environmental issues that was achieved through executive order is potentially subject to being rolled back, to being reduced or all altered as the incoming administration sees fit. To wrap up, we are potentially looking at, and apologies for the dogs downstairs. Thank you. We may be looking at a series of elections in 2022, and so this has sort of implications for the House and the Senate, just in terms of how long the current leadership in the House is potentially going to be taking over, and where senators sort of see their power. Do they see do they see a long-term balance of power between a Republican House and a democratically controlled state Senate, or do they see that as a temporary arrangement because you're going to interact more effectively with when you have leadership with members of the same party. What it does mean is there's going to be opportunities for bipartisan collaboration. That's going to be a major opportunity for advancements. This is areas of like clean water, land conservation, as well as potentially some of the consumer protection measures that were mentioned, as well as but where there are things that had more partisan success, particularly in the House of Delegates, looking at having to conduct more defense. The election of Winsome Sears as the Lieutenant Governor is something that's going to be really key in the Senate, because you have, while there is Democratic control 21-19, there is there is not a lot of cohesion amongst Democratic senators in terms of their ideology. The current majority leader really does allow the members to sort of vote with their districts, vote their priorities, which tends to mean that you don't have that much cohesion, and on any given issue where there are parochial or local concerns that move a senator, we may be looking to shore up those votes with friendly Republican senators on potentially on water, on consumer protections, on et cetera. So the math has changed. It is going to impact both the House and the Senate, but the biggest shift is the fact that we're seeing an administration change for the first time in 8 years. With a bunch of new people, potentially some influence from the Washington as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chris, for that update. Again, I think it's just really helpful for us to know what the political lay of the land is and how things could be different for our issues. So thank you, Chris, for giving us that background. So the main reason why we do the legislative preview every year is, mostly to make sure that our partners, their members, and the public, as we said earlier, really understand what we expect. Of course, there's a lot that we don't know, so we're sharing with you all what we know, but certainly, we expect things to pop up that we're not expecting as well. But the most important thing that you can do between now and the beginning of session, which is the second week of January, is communicate with your elected officials. So if you are just a concerned Virginian who cares about these issues, reach out to your state senator and to your House of Delegates member. If you work for an organization that represents a region that covers multiple elected officials, then I encourage you to reach out to them as well. It is really the most impact you can have right now. Don't wait until session has started. Really, if you have time this afternoon, that would be best, but really anytime over the next few weeks. And you can use all of the resources that we're sharing with you in order to do that. You don't have to be an expert. You can simply reach out about any of the issues that you heard today that raise to the top of your mind as something that's important, or any of the specific conservation issues that you're working on as well. Reaching out to your elected official is the number one way that you can have an impact on any of the issues that you heard today. So I'm going to, as promised, put in the chat box a couple of different resources that I flagged earlier. One, the full Common Agenda briefing book can be found on our website that has background on all of these issues and the policy recommendations that were walked through today. Two, you can get background on all of these issues. We did weeks of action throughout the entire fall, and you can dig into any of those on our blog and get more action pages, et cetera, from the various different groups that presented today. And three, if you're just looking for a primer, we did do a panel a couple of weeks ago on just how to get engaged with the General Assembly 101. But you can also download a really helpful guide on our website that walks through everything from how to track a bill, how to talk to your legislator. If you're looking for just simple guidance on what do you even say in one of these emails, you can get it all on our General Assembly 101 guide. We did just get a question if the 101 presentation last week was recorded. It was, and so we'll make sure that that goes out to all of the participants today so that you can have access to it. It's about an hour and it's a really helpful presentation, just very simple on how to track bills as they go through the General Assembly and how you can be engaged. So we'll make sure that that goes out to everybody as well. Right now, we're going to take a 10-minute break. And then when we get back, we are going to break out into state Senate district. As Chris Lane said, the state Senate is incredibly important and will be a critical line of defense to a lot of the progress that we have made over the last 2 years. So I encourage you to come back for that. What we'll do is you will go into a breakout with other people who also share your state senator. You can talk a little bit of intel about who they are, what they care about, and then talk collectively about work that you can do to either meet with them before session starts or how to communicate with them between now and session. So again, I want to thank everybody so much for attending. We will be back in 10 minutes. And so it is 11:15 now. We'll be back at 11:25. And one last final thing, just so folks know, we typically host a big lobby day for all of our partners, members, and the public on conservation issues. We will have details on that coming out soon. Right now, we're looking at a hybrid lobby day, so partially in person and allowing some online participation. As Anna stated earlier, we are still trying to figure out exactly what session is going to look like and how legislators will engage folks not in the building. So as soon as we have more information on that, we will get that out to folks and get more information about our lobby day. But it is scheduled right now for February 1st, and we will send out a save the date early next week. Thank you all again, and we will talk to everybody in about 10 minutes at 11:25 for our state Senate breakouts. All right, we are back. Hopefully folks got an opportunity to stretch their legs, maybe get some refresh on a coffee, maybe let your dogs outside because they were anxious to do something. Thank you everyone for sticking around. We are now going to head into breakouts. And the basic concept here is that we know that the state Senate is absolutely critical in this upcoming session. We also know that the most important thing that we can be doing between now and the beginning of session, which is the second week of January, is talking to our state elected officials. So we have asked you to let us know which state Senate district you live in so that you can chat with other people who live in your state Senate district. We will just cover a handful of things. We hope that you introduce yourselves to one another, that you talk a little bit about who the senator is and anything you know about them. Some of you probably know your state senators and see them all of the time and they know you by name and face. Others may have just written them an email once or twice or don't know anything about them, and that's totally fine. So just share that type of information with one another, what issues you're expecting to talk to them about. And finally, if you want to come up with a plan to either collectively or individually set up meetings with your state senator, that's the perfect thing to talk about during that time. A couple of housekeeping notes. One, if you end up in the wrong breakout group for any reason, that is fine. Just leave the breakout room. You'll come back into the main room and Lisa will help get you and guide you into the right place. Two, if it turns out that you end up in a breakout group and you are either by yourself or there's only one or two of you and you have run out of things to either talk about or are just looking to get into a bigger group, Andrew on our team will be running a breakout group that is for people who may only be, there might only be one or two people in the state Senate district. And so it'll just be a little bit of a larger group to just kind of discuss how to meet with our senators and everything like that. So also just a heads up, if you are the only one in your state Senate district, you might end up in that group to be chatting with Andrew. Three, Andrew has prepped a handful of folks who are on right now to be leads in these breakout groups. So for many of our state Senate breakouts, we do have somebody that's been tapped to lead, which is really just, really all that means is just a helpful way to help spur the conversation and to get things going, not for any, for this discussion. But if by any chance that person either at the last minute couldn't be there or in your district that didn't happen, again, you're welcome to just step up and have those handful of conversations, and we'll put those questions that I just laid out at the beginning in the chat for everyone to see. So that's what we're doing here. Are there any questions before we bump out into breakout groups that people have? Okay, awesome. Lisa, are you ready?
I think so. Mary, we're running a little bit ahead. So
I love that.
We had this marked for 25 minutes of breakout rooms. Is that still what we want to stick with?
Yes.
All right. Then
yeah, so good point. So we'll go out in the breakout rooms for 25 minutes. Thanks, Lisa, for flagging time for me. And then we'll come back, and anybody who wants to share any highlights from their breakout groups or any good ideas that they came up with, we'll have a little bit of time for a big group discussion, and then we'll wrap for the day. Thanks, Lisa, for flagging the time for me. I should have done that before.
No, not a problem. And I will do my best to give you guys
awesome. I'm also
a 5
seeing
minutes
people are
time.
putting their cameras on. So for these breakouts, totally encourage you. You do not have to, but do encourage you to put your cameras on since we'll be in smaller groups. So that is awesome as well. All right, Lisa, take it away.
All right. I think everybody should be going to the right place, but as Mary said, if not, just come back here. I'll get you where you need to go. And with that, off you go. So far, pretty good. See a couple of you left here. Let me get you to the right. Oh gosh, I don't want to do that. Let me get you guys to the right places here. Joan.
Hey, Glenn.
Back over to 34. Glenn, where are you headed? Glenn, you are muted. So Stuart, where are you headed?
Morrissey,
Morrissey.
16, I think.
We're gonna need you, Stuart.
I go to 11, Chase.
Glenn over to 11. All right.
Hey, Glenn.
You should be heading off now. Goodbye.
Great. All right. Okay.
And I'm
and
going
if
to
I
stop this
can-
recording.